Hey, it is your buddy, Peace and Harmony with you here today. And we're zooming in and focusing in on a great viewer question. And that was to really look at the differences and similarities between a narcissistic individual and a quiet borderline. Cluster B, psychopathic, whatever you want to call a label on it, realize that there's so much overlap. We're talking about people. We're talking about human nature. So there's going to be a lot of overlap. But I want to really kind of look at some of the definitive or distinguishing differences between a quiet borderline and a narcissistic individual. Now, a quiet borderline is someone who has a lot of really self-inflicting, self-sabotaging, or self-injurious or self-injury behaviors, thoughts, and emotions. There tends to be quite a bit pronounced what is known as self-loathing, self-hatred, self-reprise, just feeling like they are really just awful, hurting, and they have a need to act on or are consumed with repetitive thoughts of this. So when we talk about a borderline, we're talking about someone who has very distinct black and white thinking. It is very difficult for these individuals to think in shades of gray. In other words, in order to say, whoa, let me think about that a moment. Let me feel about that. Let me not pounce at that. Let me not become impulsive about that. It's all in or all out. It's all good or it's all bad. I'm into this or I'm not into this. And this oftentimes, this bottoming out can occur while they're in an event. So they can be at a party, in a class, at a job, and then everything is going well, and then all of a sudden, the straw breaks, and the bow bridge just falls asunder. The camel has broken its back, and they are launching. They're either walking out. They will have nothing to do with it anymore. Something just like a switch just flips, and they just throw everything down. They walk out of their job. They walk out of a relationship. They walk out of their church, their hospital, their haircut appointment. Just something in them breaks. So there's oftentimes a real issue with impulse control. And a lot of people have trouble with impulse control, but for the borderline, it's particularly difficult. And especially when it comes to rage, unhappiness, aggression, there's just this real propensity to feel very strongly. And oftentimes there's a negative connotation thought. In other words, they can be very powerfully happy, but very powerfully unhappy. They can be very powerfully intelligent, sharp, very well-witted, very emotional, empathetic individuals. So they can have an overabundance, if you will, of this intelligence and heart, and kind of getting this congruent. But yet they can also be very, very strongly opinionated and rigid and very stubborn. And if you've done something where they don't feel that is right, or they don't like that type of person or that type of value, you don't stand a chance with them. There's no shades of gray. There's no working things out. There's no kind of consideration of things. There's no mulling things over. Let's contemplate this. Let's maybe factor this in. Let's consider this. There becomes a division where it's not open to consideration, and they're just done. So oftentimes these people will have trouble with their own relationship with themselves, their interpersonal relationships with other people, because this keeps getting in the way. They just can't tolerate certain things, and it's very unexpected for them. So they're disturbed by their own feelings, and so they end up just becoming kind of self-imploding, if you will. And the quiet borderline oftentimes will not verbally tell you how they feel, but they will act it in. And so they will sometimes hurt themselves or be very kind of self-violent, self-mutilating, act it in. In other words, something happens, they're going to go on a shopping spree. They're going to debt themselves out. They're going to go and get themselves tattooed up. They're going to go and get all sorts of piercings all over the body. They'll add another piercing, another tattoo, another piercing, another tattoo. Oftentimes self-injury. where they might bang their head, they might bang their fist in a wall, they might kick things, they might cut themselves. So they have so much, that this is the only way for them to release. So they feel this rush of adrenaline. It's this rush that it can now distract them from that hurt, and then they can feel something new. The hurt begins to then bring heat to it. So they then begin to feel a relief of their tension. They relieve their tension oftentimes in these oftentimes unproductive or unfulfilling ways. In other words, where it just continues to be a negative cycle. And they can become disturbed by their own lifestyle, so they seek assistance. So oftentimes, so there's very specific therapies or types of therapies that can help them. And also, in helping them understand events in a more positive way, helping them to change the story, change the meaning of things, begin to, change their cognition, say, maybe I should consider, or I see this coming. They are able to better identify their triggers. So those are ways that can help them. Now, a narcissist they will get upset, and they will oftentimes pounce at narcissistic rage and aggression when they're at a deficit for narcissistic supplies. So what will trigger them is when everything is not going their way, when they're not, quote unquote, looking good, when their outfit isn't working out, when this isn't working out, when things just aren't living up to these really inflated expectations. You might show up and your hair might be out of place. Your shoe might be out of place. They want to point the finger at you and make negative quips and comments. You're wearing those shoes, you're wearing that jacket, you're wearing this and that. This, if it's not according to their liking, they're sure going to let you know. So if it's not making them look good, see, this is where it's a little bit different than a borderline, because the attention, the focus is on something completely different. The narcissist wants it all to be about them, and they're oftentimes lacking in empathy. They have a deficit. This is part of their personality disorder, is they're not able to have consideration and get to know other people's feelings. They really truly don't have an interest in it. They don't feel a need. And in fact, even oftentimes people think it's unnecessary. It slows them down. Why should I slow down my life to learn about other people? Why would that be important? Until things happen in their life, and the narcissist might hit rock bottom, but oftentimes they're so adept at making new friends, getting new jobs, that they don't really have to deal with their insecurity until much later in life. Perhaps when they're suffering some health issues and they really have to look at what they've done, and they realize that they're very shallow, very hollow, very empty, and then you'll see this really the bad side coming through, but they will not abandon their narcissistic ways. And the borderline, though, there's a much greater amount of impulse control issues. So there's no brakes on the car when it comes to certain things. So they have to learn to ease into situations or ease into themselves and learn to see things coming and try to make those adjustments in their thoughts or the stories that they're telling themselves or the opinions, or try to say, okay, maybe we can consider this. So it does take a lot of time and energy and effort, whereas the borderline perhaps can, can make a little bit of steps forward, and they have a real, physical reminder oftentimes of their problems, the smashed cars, the smashed doors, the tattoos, the razor cutting, the people who, or who they've hurt, or the bridges that they've burned. The narcissist, oftentimes doesn't have that same impulse control. They have more the rage, the aggression, but it's when they're not feeling narcissistic, filled to the rim and above, that they're going to see that. So it's not as often. So I hope that this little talk helps. This is your buddy, Peace and Harmony. Much love to my empowered harmonizers. Please share, please subscribe for more great tools, videos, discussion, and support.